Hello everyone. Watch till the end of the video for a surprise. I'll see you there. The House by the Sea. This happened back when I had a newspaper route. There was one house which was a real pain to deliver to. It was at the edge of a thick forest, and I was always frightened that there were things in there. There was a long path which leads up to that house, and not only that, but when you got to the house, it was surrounded by walls on three sides. The sea was just beyond that house over the cliff face. I delivered the newspapers really early in the morning too, like 3 a.m., and I was always scared of delivering to that house because it gave off bad vibes, and to be honest, I am scared of the dark. It was one night in August and I was heading towards that house with the newspapers when I saw something that I couldn't believe. There was a small boy playing on one of those walls which surrounded the house. What the hell is he doing out there at this hour? I asked myself. The walls were about 1 meter high, and as I got closer to the house, I noticed that there was light spilling from one window. I guess that kid was bored, got up early, and then came outside to play. I remember the feeling of waking up before anyone in my family and playing games downstairs, and I thought, that kid's a little like me. It was kind of nostalgic. The boy looked like he was in his final year of kindergarten. He was young, and he would jump from one wall to the other where the corners met. It was odd, but with him there, I wasn't as scared of this place in the dark. I mean, he didn't seem scared. I delivered the newspaper like normal and went on my way. The next day he was back again, jumping around in the same place. He was doing the same thing the next day. By the fourth day, I felt as if I should say something. Hey, kid, what are you doing? That's really dangerous. You know you could fall and hurt yourself, right? What do you think your mom or dad would say about this? The boy just looked at me and silently jumped off to the other side of the wall, outside of their family home's ground. I was so shocked that I let out a scream. On the inside of the wall, the drop is only 1 meter, but the outside of the wall was a cliff face. I could hear the size of the waves crashing against the rocks below, and I never saw how far the drop was because I had only seen it in the dark of night. But I guessed it to be at least 10 meters. I couldn't see him down there, and when I looked back at the house, the lights were off. I ran back to tell the boss of the newspaper company. I couldn't think what else to do, but I wasn't prepared for his answer. What are you doing delivering newspapers to that address? It's not on your route. I told him that it was, and he showed me the route map, and that house was now showing as blank, meaning that they didn't request a newspaper delivery. My boss could see that this had shaken me up, so he told me to go home for the day. Luckily, it wasn't a weekday, and I could go home rather than go to school early. When I got home, I couldn't do anything besides worry about that poor boy, and when the sun came up, I headed back to the house to see if I could find out what happened. I know I should have called the police or an ambulance, but I was young, and I really thought that I might get into trouble. To be honest, I think my boss should have made that call, and I'm surprised he didn't. When I got there, I realized that the house was overgrown with weeds. It never looked like that in the dark. Some of the windows were broken in places too. There was no name on the mailbox, and to be perfectly honest, it looked abandoned. Nothing made sense here. I ran over to the area that I saw the boy jump from. And I was right that the drop below was at least 10 meters and the waves were lashing on the jagged rocks. There was no place else for the kid to have landed but those rocks. Fear and a sense of sorrow loomed in the pit of my stomach. Then just before I turned away in horror, I noticed something. There was something white down there. It was a bouquet of flowers and one of my newspapers. And even at that age, I understood what had happened. I will never forget that encounter with the paranormal. Buy this book, translated by Jane Nightmares. This happened when I was a kid. I remember that it happened just after we had dinner, and I was in the living room relaxing when I heard the doorbell. I was 10 years old, and I, for some reason, was always the one to go answer the door. My parents worked late, and it was usually just me, my younger brother, and my grandparents at home at weeknights. Our front door had frosted glass, but you could see through it enough to recognize people. I guessed that there was a woman at the door. I wondered if it was a neighbor, and I just opened the door without thinking. Behind the door was an elderly woman that I hadn't ever seen before. The old woman offered no greeting. She just said, "Buy this book for 1,000 yen. And 1,000 yen is just over $7. She held the book in front of her with her arms outstretched. I was really puzzled. I didn't know what to say, and I heard my grandfather coming towards the front door. And when he arrived at the door, she just repeated the same phrase. "Buy this book for 1,000 yen. I couldn't get my head around something. Why would anyone want to buy a dirty old book at that price when they could get a book from a bookshop? I was only 10 years old, but I knew enough to distrust that woman at that age. But to my surprise, my grandfather whipped out his wallet and said, "Okay, I'll buy it for 1,000 yen. I couldn't believe this. It was just a bad deal. I thought he was acting stupid. And as soon as he handed over the money, the old lady smiled, and her smile genuinely creeped me out. And although it sounds mundane, it was positively chilling. The old woman then said, "That's great. The red cat won't come out." I couldn't make heads or tails of what was happening. They were both acting so strangely. She turned and left, and I made a confused face to my grandfather. He was still watching her leave and didn't notice. I looked at the book, and it was just a cheap-looking detective novel. I asked my grandpa outright, "Why did you do that? You know that book isn't worth that price. Why do you even want it?" "If I didn't buy it, I think we would have had some trouble," he replied. I asked him what he meant, and at first, I don't think he wanted to tell me, but I persisted. The red cat refers to arson, or a pyromaniac. It's slang, very old slang. So Grandpa was paying for our house not to be targeted for a deliberate fire. The next day, I was really eager to tell my friends about what had happened, and that was when I found out that our house wasn't the only house that was visited by the strange old lady. We went around the school at lunchtime asking anyone we could find if they got visited by the old woman. There were over 20 kids who said that she came to their family home store. They didn't even live near one another, and it seemed like the old lady was picking houses arbitrarily. There was no pattern to houses. Some were on the outskirts of town, and some were right in the middle. I guess That is so she can avoid police or neighborhood associations or something. I'm not really sure. Our family have lived in that home for decades, and no one has ever seen that woman again at the door. I didn't hear about any arrests or crimes in my area, but arson happens. It was wise of my grandpa to pay her off because I wouldn't want a person like that to have a grudge against our family. She targeted different areas in our district, and I imagine she did this in other districts too. My grandfather, who has long since passed, said at that time, "If you can buy security for 1,000 yen, it's cheap." I was really lucky that he understood what she was implying. So, just a little backstory on that word and its etymology. It seemed to be from the Meiji period, and it even existed in the Edo period. Why is it called the red cat? There is a rather unpleasant theory behind this. Well, I will say a superstition. It cannot be said that there is any truth to this, but it's worth sharing. A live cat was set on fire and thrown into a family home by someone who had a grudge against the family. And as the cat ran rampant around the home, it engulfed the house in flames and its fur looked red, so therefore, it's called the red cat. I don't know if that's the case, but it certainly makes sense if the word is used for arson. It's very mysterious. Life at the Shrine, translated by J. Nightmares. I want to tell you a couple of stories about when I used to live on the streets as a homeless man. It was hell living on the streets. The stares and the looks of disgust were nothing compared to the violence that I endured. I got into an altercation with some guys one night in a park in Tokyo, and I was beaten to within an inch of my life. I had to get out of the area, as I thought that they would be back, and I remember moving from place to place, and it was all a bit of a blur. Somehow, I ended up way up in the sticks, close to the mountains, and eventually, I ended up living in an abandoned shrine. It wasn't so bad. I would walk down to the village and get exchange for my labor for food in the village. You might think that living in an abandoned shrine might be scary, but I can tell you that there was only one thing that I was scared of at that time: people. I would offer my services to anyone who had any work available. I like to think of myself as a jack of all trades, an all-rounder. I would often go to ask people on the street or go door to door trying to drum up some work. Once, a guy asked me what services I could offer. "Pretty much anything," I said. He then pulled a gun out, cocked the trigger, and put it against my head. "It's loaded," he said. You can imagine how I felt, right? He put the gun away and said, "I just wanted to point a loaded gun at the human." Then, he threw some money my way and left. I guess that the cash he threw was what he deemed the value of my life to be. Not long after that, a gang found out where I had been living, and they came late one night. When they found me, one said a phrase so off-putting that I don't think I will ever forget it. "You have no human rights." He had already dehumanized me. They carried sticks, iron bars, and metal pipes and came at me. It was too late to escape, and when they were through, I was left with a broken leg. It was hell. At the same time, I experienced such a lack of humanity, but I also experienced the opposite. The farmer that I had worked for in the village brought food to me when he had heard about the gang attack, and even paid for my hospital bills. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't have been found, and I might have starved to death in my makeshift home. There was no way that I could have gotten down the mountain into the village with a broken leg. I owed that man my life. I asked if there was any way that I could repay him, and he just replied, "Ah, hell, why don't you try and grow some vegetables or something? Make yourself a living. Pay me back something when you get set up. There's no rush." I learned a lot of agricultural work from him. Even when he gave me a method to repay his generosity, I felt like I was still getting more than I was giving. The soil by the shrine was hard and nothing much would grow, but I was determined to pay him back. I would go to the river countless times a day to fetch water, and eventually, I made some serious progress. This joy was short-lived. A group of people who were into urban exploration came to the abandoned shrine and trashed my little farm. They stomped all over my plants. Why? I had nothing, yet people still wanted to take from me. Something snapped in me. I felt robbed, and I wanted someone to pay for it. I kept a 2x4 with me at all times, and I decided to be ready for whoever wanted to mess with me. Living that way made me happy. Fight or flight, I returned to animal instincts, and I knew that all humans were capable of terrible acts, and I grew less trustworthy. I was always scared of spirits and ghosts, but humans are worse. It was at this point that I started seeing things, and I thought the shrine was haunted. I decided if there was something else with me in the shrine, I wanted to be of service to the shrine since the farm wasn't working out. I had learned some carpentry skills when I was younger, and I thought that I would try and clean up the place and mend some things. Maybe, if the shrine looked a little bit more maintained, it would keep the urban explorers and gangs away. Being busy took my mind off my hate for those who sought to hurt me, and I started to speak to God or whatever the spirits that inhabited the shrine were. I would say hello and goodbye, at first to myself, and then quietly, but in the end, I was talking loudly like there was someone with me. Eventually, the shrine looked pretty good, and I started to see the ghost again. She was a beautiful woman, and she was so pleased that I had cleaned up the shrine. She would just sit there and comb her gorgeous hair. Sometimes, I wouldn't even see her, but I would just hear some rummaging noises. I felt that I had some company, and I enjoyed it. The gang came back one night, the same gang which attacked me and broke my leg. They laughed at me when I called for help, when I called to her. But they weren't laughing when my friend who owned the farm arrived with his hunting rifle. They never came back after that, and since he saved me, I decided to stop being so hateful, and I put that energy in agriculture. I still needed to pay him back, even though he wasn't expecting anything from me. I was determined, and through years of hard work, dedication, and support from my friend, I managed to hone my skills. I found some land to rent, used it, did well, and I kept repeating. Now, I own several plots and I have several employees. I usually offer work to those who are in the same position as me, the homeless. And as for my friend, I paid him back. I bought him several plots of land by the mountains. Finding a partner hasn't really worked out for me, but whenever I am down, I seem to dream about the spirit of the woman in the shrine. Sometimes I think I was rescued by someone other than my farmer friend. So, my next project is restoring the shrine to its former glory and reinstating a priest there. Underneath, translated by J. Nightmares. This is a story that I was told by my granddad. He grew up during the war, and back then, many of the houses had these dirt floors out in the countryside. It was pretty normal apparently in Japan. I will try to provide you with word for word of what my grandfather told me. His father was a taxi driver, and his mother died before he was 5 years old. His dad needed to work every hour God sent him just to keep food on the table, and it couldn't have been easy back then. Since he was a taxi driver, he worked a lot of antisocial hours. He would stay with his neighbors while his father was working, and then, when his father finished work, he would come and get him. It became more and more frequent, and his father didn't want to be a bother to his neighbors after they had been so helpful. So sometimes, when he knew that he would be home really late, he would leave my granddad home alone. Of course, this situation wasn't ideal, and my grandfather said that he was very lonely and scared at home alone. He said that he would sit on the floor and cry and call for his father often. The neighbors would hear this, but they couldn't do much as they didn't want to intervene. One night, the neighbor heard my dad's cries stop, and then they heard laughter. They thought to themselves that, "Hey, that's great. Maybe my father is home." But a couple of hours later, they heard my granddad call out to his father as they came through the door. The neighbor thought it was strange because they were convinced that my granddad was talking with someone next door. Over the course of the days and weeks, the neighbors heard my grandpa laughing and talking with someone next door. When they knew that his father was out driving his taxi, the neighbor grew concerned and suspicious, so they went to investigate. My grandpa was apparently sat alone in the kitchen, on the dirt floor and in the dark, laughing and speaking with something unseen. They were really worried about him, so they waited with him until his father came home. When his dad came home, he was asked directly about who he had been speaking with every night. My grandpa said in response, "I have been speaking to the mother. I was scared and lonely and crying, so the mother came. She hugs me and rubs my cheeks, and she cares about me." His father then asked about how this mother was getting in and out, and my granddad pointed at the corner of the kitchen. The dirt was disturbed in this area. There was a gap between the bottom of the wooden wall and the dirt floor. Someone could have crawled in and out through that gap. My granddad then said to his father, "She crawls through each night smiling at me." Well, my granddad's father was disturbed by that and covered the gap with boards and asked for a reduction of hours at work while he looked for a new place. Sometimes at night, he said he heard scratching against the boards, but could never find anyone out there when he went to look for the source of the sound. People Go Missing on That Mountain. Translated by J. Nightmares. This happened about 5 years ago, and back then, I was really interested in photography. Whatever time that I could take off work, I'd used to go traveling to take photos. It was autumn, and I had planned to visit a rural village that lied in the shadow of the mountains. I could already imagine the colors of the leaves, and I was really looking forward to it. The area was very traditional, in that I mean that it was like looking into a picture from the past. It was a proper rural agricultural village, and my eyes bulged at its beauty. My head was brimming with ideas for photos. And when I say it was a rural village, I'm not only talking about a couple of fields, but the mountains that stood over it were truly beautiful. There was some kind of eccentricity to this village that I couldn't put my finger on, and I tend to look for beauty in unusual places. I remember that there were some flat lands where beautiful yellow flowers that I hadn't ever seen before were growing. They hadn't been leveled or cut, they were just there in their own patch, and I loved it. The forest floor was littered with fallen autumn leaves, and I was fascinated with my surroundings. I wanted to immerse myself in nature, and I sat down on the forest floor for a while. On my first day in the village, I decided to stroll through the forest and shoot some photos. I got a little away from the village, and I found a natural path in the forest which led to the mountains. The path twisted left and right, and there were these huge boulders littering the way, like buttons on a giant's coat. I went up the path, and there was a clear barrier between me and a trail to the mountains. It was a rope tied at waist height, and here in Japan they are called shimenawa. And you might have seen this kind of rope at shrines, as it usually is at the entrance to mark its sacred nature. The thing is, in public places like shrines, they aren't tied at waist height. They are usually high up, allowing people to pass underneath them. This was intentionally either stopping people from going any further or stopping someone else from coming any further, depending which way you looked at it or what side of the rope you were on. I found it very interesting, and I really wanted to push on and climb over it, but since the sun was setting, I decided not to brave the unknown and head back to my inn. Later that night, I asked the innkeeper about the path that I found in the mountains, and he told me not to go back there. He said it wouldn't be a good idea to cross over that rope and head further up the mountain, as many people have been known to disappear on that path. I thought about it, and maybe the innkeeper was just saying that to keep me out of there, or he heard many stories from the villagers which made him believe that the mountain path was off limits. I thought that there wasn't much to this story. So the next day, I decided to head back up there again without telling anyone. I headed up there early, but everyone was already up, and I had to wait for the villagers to stop watching me that morning before I could make my move. Word travels fast out there, I guess. I was heading back up the path, and I was thinking, nothing happens when you go past that rope. It's fine, it's just a mountain. Once I passed the rope, the mountain path and its surroundings seemed to double in its beauty, yet the path remained the same, like it had been walked many times before, and it seemed quite a depressing path. I was walking along as if I were in a dream. The scenery was the same either side of the path, and I grew a bit nervous. I was most worried about getting lost after a short while, and I found a body of water. It was like a swamp kind of stream, so I started heading up the path, keeping parallel with that, and that way I could always follow it back down. After a while, the path gave way to the natural barrier that was the mountain. I was kind of disappointed, to be honest. I figured that there wasn't much else worth checking out, and I almost decided to head back. But that was when I noticed it. Alongside the steep mountain face was a hollow indent, and there was a house built into the mountain face. Well, it wasn't a modern house. Maybe a hut or a lodge would be a more accurate description, come to think of it. The walls were white with a tiled roof, and it looked like it was in a pretty decent condition too. I felt someone could have come out of the house at any moment, and I didn't want to get caught on what I guess was their property, since I passed through the rope. So I turned on my heels and went to get out of there, and I headed back down towards the village. And halfway back to the inn, I was suddenly stopped by a person calling out to me. Shit. I felt guilty. I had just been caught doing something that I shouldn't, so I climbed up and didn't say a word. I turned around to see what kind of trouble I was in. I saw an old guy that I recognized. There was a guy who lived across from the inn. I had said hello to him a couple of times, and he was sat on the top of a big rock. He told me off, and I deserved it. He said that there were bears out here. I apologized a bunch of times, and I told him that I would head back right away. He said he would take me back, and he shouted at me and how lucky I was that I didn't go any further. He said that there were things out there worse than bears too. That's when I noticed that he was holding a gun in his hand. I said what the gun was for. He smiled and said, "Just self-defense." He was a trapper, and he said that he has never once used the gun. But knowing what he knew about that area, he said that it would be a stupid idea not to bring the gun each time that he went past the rope because of the bears. He said that the bears have always been there. People who do what I did are the people who go missing. Sometimes it's not a cryptid, not an insane person in the woods, or a missing 411 story. Sometimes it's people like me who willfully ignore the rules, and if it wasn't for that guy, I might not be here typing this. Seems like a miracle that I got out of there alive. And here are the top comments from my last video. Welcome to Miss Creepy Tales Riddle Time. If you know the answer, feel free to leave it in the comments. And the winner gets to be featured in the next video. I am present, but also past. I am wrapped, but not a gift. I am named after a parent, but I have no children. What am I? Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.